We're back! It's the Moby-Dick read-along dream, presented by Robinson Reed. Yeah! Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Moby-Dick read-along. I don't even know what part this is actually anymore. Chapters 41 through 50. And after a brief interlude, we're returning. Kind of like always, I'm sure that you could have read this book 6 times in the time it's taken me to make this read-along series. But I have a good excuse this time for my break. I've moved to Japan. So this background you see behind me, though it was also extant in my old fairy-lit boudoir on the other side of the camera. This is actually a new one because I've flown across the Pacific Ocean and have started a new life. So of course that's taken some time to get settled and everything, but I'm settling in quite nicely. And what better way to celebrate your entry into Japan than to read a book about whaling? Am I right? Up top. Okay, today's chapter is chapter 41. Well, today's set of chapters is 41 through 50, but we're starting with 41, which is a great place to jump back in, because the title of chapter 41 is Moby-Dick. And when we last left off, we had one of those Shakespearean stage play setting chapters, which was great, and it ended kind of with this big huzzah. And then chapter 41 opens with this wonderful paragraph. I, Ishmael, was one of that crew. My shouts had gone up with the rest. My oath had been welded with theirs, and stronger I shouted, and more did I hammer and clinch my oath, because of the dread in my soul. A wild, mystical, sympathetical feeling was in me. Ahab's quenchless feud seemed mine. With greedy ears I learned the history of that murderous monster against whom I and all the others had taken our oaths of violence and revenge. And I love the way that Melville begins this. He's actually really, really good with like the first couple of words he uses in books and chapters. So famously, obviously, Call Me Ishmael. Great opening. The opening of Bartleby is, I am a rather elderly man. And it's hard to pinpoint why exactly I love that, but I love that. And I love the I, comma, Ishmael, comma, was one of that crew. Because we're starting to see that Ishmael is slipping out of the narrative a little bit. Whatever narrative storytelling power takes hold of this book, whatever that thing is growing. It's starting to kind of leave Ishmael in this kind of shadow realm, while it omnisciently explores all of the goings-on of the Pequod. And all of the goings-on of the universe, really, because we're going to get a chapter in here called The Whiteness of the Whale, which is pretty universal. So I love that in this chapter we open with that, Ishmael, to kind of bring us back to where we are. It just feels great. And in this chapter, as a brief summary, we essentially get a physical description of the white whale. And also, most importantly, a really vivid account of how Ahab lost his leg and how he kind of specifically went insane. So moving on through these pages, the opening of this chapter really deals with the lore of this whale, because at the time, these ships are on the open ocean for years at a time, rarely encountering other ships, almost never going to port, never getting any news of any kind. So naturally, superstitious legend would grow in this kind of concentrated hothouse environment. And they're sailors. And Melville points out in this chapter that whalers are even more superstitious than sailors. And there's this wonderful sentence to describe this phenomenon. He says, For not only do fabulous rumors naturally grow out of the very body of all surprising, terrible events, as the smitten tree gives birth to its fungi, but in maritime life, far more than that, than of terra firma. And I love that. The rumors are like fungi growing out of a smitten tree. The terrible event being the smitten tree. He just has this brain that is able to connect, historical events, natural phenomena, whatever it is, with whatever he wants to describe. And the way he does it is always just so rich and vivid. And also increases, I think, for me, not only my enjoyment, obviously, but my comprehension. I think I understand these ideas better when he puts them in terms of fungi growing on trees. I feel it, I see it, my imagination is stoked. So I'm just going to continually, I guess, try to sell this book. I don't know why I have this kind of rhetorical. I'm trying to make an argument for Moby-Dick just because the perception of it is as we said, big, boring, and dusty. And he goes on to talk about how, of course, the sperm whale fishery, especially, even more than the other whalers, breeds the most wonderful, crazy, violent rumors, so that a kind of Greenland whaler would find the things that are described in the southern seas as extraordinary. And he says that these kind of Greenland whalers, seated on their hatches, these men will hearken with a childish fireside interest and awe to the wild, strange tales of southern whaling. Nor is the preeminent tremendousness of the great sperm whale anywhere more feelingly comprehended than on board of those prows which stem him. So that's just a great image of these probably very hardy, gruff, hairy men, listening to the stories of the sperm whale. Oh my gosh. But like by the fire, it's just so sweet. This whole chapter is just sprinkled with great Melville sentences. He says that basically when Moby-Dick started to get this reputation, people started to realize that to chase Moby-Dick, to give chase and to try to make Moby-Dick fast to the ship is suicide, and that to attempt it would be inevitably to be torn into a quick eternity. What a turn of phrase. That is so good. And we get more, actually. We've already talked about cetology. What is so interesting about this book, too, is to see what was known about this magical creature, of which we are still learning today. Today I saw an article, in fact I'll try to link it down below and in this video, of researchers observing the birth of a sperm whale. And they noticed that basically 10 to 15 different sperm whales were assisting a mother in giving birth, and around half of them were not even kin, which displays some form of social reciprocation, which, as if we needed more proof to know that sperm whales and whales in general are complex, emotional creatures. We see that these kind of unrelated whales would help this baby sperm whale. They would lift the baby to the surface so that it could breathe right after being born. So we're still learning so much about sperm whales, which is so cool. Never thought I'd be interested in sperm whales, but here we are. And Melville says here, "For as the secrets of the currents in the seas have never yet been divulged, even to the most erudite research, so the hidden ways of the sperm whale, when beneath the surface, remain, in great part, unaccountable to his pursuers." And I think that this is also true today, as far as I know. I don't know if we've really put, a collar around a sperm whale and seen, to what depths they sound and so on. And I don't think we've ever had any footage of sperm whales battling giant squid, which we know happens, which is just amazing. It's kind of nice to still be alive in an era of human history where there are still secrets of the natural world. And there always will be, but the days of James Cook are over, and I think that people who are at least born in my generation do kind of feel a sort of cynicism and sadness about there not being that much natural wonder left. There aren't any kind of far off, unknown, explored lands that, for one reason or another, might kind of give us hope. Hopefully not the hope that the old conquistadors had to pillage and rape everything, but hoping that there is more to this world that can be explored and maybe different ways of doing things. And I don't know. It's nice going back to a book like this where there is a lot of wonder still. And more great descriptions of Moby-Dick throughout this chapter, and finally a physical description, specifically, for it was not so much his uncommon bulk that so much distinguished him from other sperm whales, but, as elsewhere thrown out, a peculiar snow-white wrinkled forehead, and a high, pyramidical white hump. These were his prominent features, the tokens whereby, even in the limitless uncharted seas, he revealed his identity at a long distance to those who knew him. Which, of course, you have to kind of incorporate that detail into a book like this, because if you're hunting a whale and you see a spout a mile off, you can't have your characters in the book say, "Oh, there she blows, that's Moby-Dick," because how are you going to know? But Moby-Dick is very, very distinct. The rest of his body was so streaked and spotted and marbled with the same shrouded hue that in the end he had gained his distinctive appellation of the white whale, a name, indeed, literally justified by his vivid aspect when seen gliding at high noon through a dark blue sea, leaving a Milky Way wake of creamy foam, all spangled with golden gleamings. More great, delicious, vivid description. The white whale in the dark blue sea, leaving the Milky Way. That is just immediately there in your mind. At least for me, it is. And this is just a great, more like vivid writing from Herman Melville. It's crazy. I'm looking down back at the bottom of the page. We then get this account from about Ahab's dismastation, about how he was dismasted. And this is the last kind of passage that I'll read you from this chapter before we move on. But isn't this just crazy and wonderful? It's like at this point in the book, let's see how far we are. We're like, I guess, what is that? 2/5 of the way through the book. We start to kind of get the story that most people know about Moby-Dick, about Ahab losing his leg and then going crazy and wanting to, go capture this white whale. Happening on page 199. It's a bit late for most people, so I understand why some people would be upset. But we've had so much build-up, so much foreshadowing that it hits all the harder now. His 3 boats stove around him, and oars and men both whirling in the eddies. One captain, seizing the line knife from his broken prow, had dashed at the whale, as an Arkansas duelist at his foe, blindly seeking with a 6-inch blade to reach the fathom-deep life of the whale. What a great description of the futility of this crazy captain's idea of taking a 6-inch blade to kill a sperm whale. It seems like he's just kind of frenzied, not really thinking logically at this point. That captain was Captain Nemo. No, it's Captain Ahab. And then it was that suddenly sweeping his sickle-shaped lower jaw beneath him, Moby-Dick had reaped away Ahab's leg as a mower a blade of grass in the field. And in the, what's his name? I'm blanking out on his name right now. I forget, but in this professor's 10-hour-long seminar he did on Moby-Dick, which is a YouTube video, he basically describes this passage specifically, drawing attention to the fact that a mower gives basically no thought to what blade of grass he's particularly mowing at that given time. Basically, this sentence to this professor, whose name I can't believe I'm forgetting right now, he has a very fun kind of like dull-sounding name that is very endearing. I can't believe it's gone. It'll come back to me. But basically, this is evidence of the fact that Moby-Dick is not vengeful. Moby-Dick is all of the kind of vengeful things that have been ascribed to him are really just human constructs being applied to just not a dumb brute, maybe like Starbuck would say earlier. But not some sort of intelligence that's specifically malicious. But the next sentence, it goes in contrast to that. No turbaned Turk, no hired Venetian or Malay could have smote him with more seeming malice. Where's the seeming malice in mowing grass? So that's an interesting point. I don't know how much I really feel that. I don't know if the mowing grass metaphor so much is trying to show that Moby-Dick doesn't actually care about who he's mowing down, but it's more just about how easy it is for Moby-Dick to just kind of cut off a leg or an arm. But anyways, interesting. Hubert Dreyfus? Hubert something? Who knows? I can't believe I'm forgetting. Anyways, small reason was there to doubt then that ever since that almost fatal encounter, Ahab had cherished a wild vindictiveness against the whale. All the more fell, for that in his frantic morbidness he at last came to identify with him, not only all his bodily woes, but all his intellectual and spiritual exasperations. So, of course, we're going to see actually later in this book that getting your limb chopped off by an animal in this line of work is not the craziest thing to have happen to you. People are dying all the time. It's Ahab's assigning Moby-Dick with all of his spiritual exasperations that makes him so crazy. Anyways, the white whale swam before him as the monomaniac incarnation of all those malicious agencies which some deep men feel eating in them, till they are left living on with half a heart and half a lung. Shout out to all my deep men out there. Do you feel malicious agencies in monomaniac incarnations eating you until you're left with half a heart and half a lung? Let me know in the comments. That intangible malignity which has been from the beginning. That's interesting. That intangible malignity which has been from the beginning. What does that mean? Is there some sort of deep, profound, fundamental evil to the universe? Kind of a dark thing to say. Maybe this is why Herman Melville wrote in that letter to Hawthorne that this is a wicked book, because of that sort of conceit of the universe, is that there's an intangible malignity which has been from the beginning, to whose dominion even the modern Christians ascribe one half of the worlds, which the ancient Ophites of the East reverenced in their statue devil. Ahab did not fall down and worship it like them, but, deliriously transferring its idea to the abhorred white whale, he pitted himself, all mutilated, against it. All that most maddens and torments, all that stirs up the lees of things, great sentence, all truth with malice in it, all that cracks the sinews and cakes the brain, all the subtle demonisms of life and thought, all evil to crazy Ahab, were visibly personified and made practically assailable in Moby-Dick. He piled upon the whale's white hump the sum of all the general rage and hate felt by his whole race from Adam down, and then, as if his chest had been a mortar, he burst his heart's hot shell upon it. Wow. Oh, actually, I misread it. It's his heart's shell upon it. Still, I mean, what a passage. That is so well written. Yeah, so now we get it. Now we get why Ahab is so crazy about the whale. He's assigned all evil, we get basically every single thing here. All that cracks the sinews and cakes the brain, the subtle demonisms, it's all visibly personified, right? This is not Ishmael/Melville saying Moby-Dick is these things. This is saying to Ahab, this is what this is. It's just clear. It's very clear about giving Ahab's perspective here. What a thing. And then we really get a wonderful description after this, which I won't read, about how Ahab's craziness wasn't, as soon as his leg was cut off, it's not like he immediately was like, well, I'm going to spend the rest of my life going after this dumb brute. It was that he was laying in his hammock in agony for months on the return journey that he went kind of insane. And there's this horrifying image of him basically after he's screaming and raving that the crewmates kind of have to lock him up and put him in a straitjacket and wrap him tight around. And it says, even there as he sailed, raving in his hammock, in a straitjacket, he swung to the mad rockings of the gales. So he's just tied up, swinging in his cabin as the ship rocks. I mean, can you imagine the pain of having an amputated leg, pre any anesthetic and whatever? No wonder he goes so crazy. And I don't know if this was, I think this already happened in this book. I'm losing track of actually where in the book this happened. I hope this isn't a spoiler, but we do get a description at some point in this book about how Ahab has an accident in his hotel or in his house, basically back in New Bedford or Nantucket, and he basically trips, breaks his peg leg, and his peg leg stabs him in a sensitive area. So this part of Moby-Dick, could be the fact that Moby-Dick, through the transitive property, literally emasculates Ahab. If we needed any more reason for motivation for Ahab to be so crazy. That's an interpretation. I don't think that's that explicit, but I think different scholars have said that, and that I've read in some essays about this book. Who knows? Also, we're getting a lot of Moby-Dick and a lot of the pronoun he. How do we know Moby-Dick's a he? I mean, really, we don't know. It's the mysteries of nature. Moby-Dick could be the great symbol of femininity, there's a real interpretation for that. In fact, I'm sure there's essays on that. And then, of course, Ahab kind of is able to concentrate that madness towards this single purpose And he's made more dangerous by his madness and more competent because there's this sort of drive moving towards one thing. Whereas most of us in life, we direct our energies towards, the balance that we seek. We direct it towards reading and our work and our relationships and, our creativity and maybe our physical health and working out and cooking and whatever. We have lots of different things that we care about, right? And to Ahab, that's a weakness, because he's stripped away caring about anything else, and all of his mental faculties are focused on one thing, which is why his madness in this book isn't a raving lunatic's madness. It's the biblical madness. It's the kind of, almost mad genius madness. But mad genius, as represented in TV and movies, is never given half as good of a character as it is given here in Ahab. And then finally, we get the reasons why Ahab is able to pursue this. Peleg and Bildad don't understand what's really happened to him. It says, had any one of his old acquaintances on shore but half dreamed what was lurking in him, how soon would their aghast and righteous souls have wrenched the ship from such a fiendish man. So if these business-minded, merchant class kind of people knew that Ahab only cared about killing one whale and was kind of a psycho about it, of course they wouldn't let him have the Pequod. But Ahab's he's a competent man. If this is his one mission, he's going to be smart about it. And the same way we've heard earlier, he's going to be smart about lowering for whales, because for all the high and mighty, abstract, lofty goals of man, you can't hold that abstract forever without giving him something to kind of chew on in the meantime, some cash, some fat, or whatever it is. And for the crew, it's going to be lowering for whales and making money. So as long as they can continue doing that, they can keep holding that high and lofty goal. But if they're going after Moby-Dick and they're not getting anything from it, and they know that there's a high chance that they're going to die, Ahab knows he's going to fail. So Ahab's competent enough to actually have a battle plan. He's not just going to jump into the ocean and try to swim to Moby-Dick until he finds him and strangle him. He's not crazy. He's going to be practically mad. So practical madness is kind of the theme, I think, of this chapter. And then we get a brief description of how the weaknesses of all of the mates enables Ahab to accomplish this. Here then was this gray-headed, ungodly old man chasing with curses a Job's whale around the world, at the head of a crew, too, chiefly made up of Mongol renegades and castaways and cannibals. Morally enfeebled also, and that's the ticket, morally enfeebled by the incompetence of mere unaided virtue or right-mindedness in Starbuck, the invulnerable jollity of indifference and recklessness in Stubb, and the pervading mediocrity in Flask. So all three mates have their own sort of flaw that allows Ahab to do what he wants to do. And, the most important of these is the incompetence of mere unaided virtue in Starbuck. Starbuck's a good man, but he's not able to do this unaided. He needs, he's his first mate. His whole psychology is based on the fact that he takes orders. He's not able to rest. Was rest the right word? To get power back and kind of mutiny against Ahab. But my favorite description of the flaw is Stubbs, the invulnerable jollity of indifference. Stubbs just a fun pipe-smoking guy joshing around in his whaleboat. He doesn't have what it takes to kind of put a stop to madness. So it's just a fascinating chapter. Moby-Dick, of course, would be a fascinating chapter. We get so much in it. We get the psychology of Ahab. We get the ways in which he's enabled. We get the descriptions of Moby-Dick. We also get a little bit of the scientific inquiry into basically how whales move. And I think this is the chapter in which maybe we see... Oh, no, it was an earlier chapter, or maybe perhaps a later chapter. Yes, later chapter, the chart, we get more scientific inquiry into how we can actually find one whale in the oceans. That seems crazy to landlubbers like me, but it's not to whalers who actually see and understand the patterns. So it's just a well-rounded chapter. It's very beautiful, and we'll be moving on to chapter 42, the whiteness of the whale, very shortly. And before we go, I'll just show you also, sometimes I draw these little images. There's my Moby-Dick for this one. All right, next chapter. All right. Chapter 42 is the whiteness of the whale. Another divisive chapter in this book that some people see as being intentionally difficult or obscure or dumb and irrelevant. And some people think it's just so fascinating and strange and wonderful and also mystical. I tend to fall towards the latter half, although I won't lie that I don't think I get this chapter very much. I enjoyed a lot, and there's definitely parts of it that I understand. But I can remember reading it the first time and having this thought of, well, this is a long book. This is kind of difficult. I'm not going to try to force myself to understand every single thing he's saying. I'm just going to try to bask in the prose, if that makes sense. That's what I did the first time. And the second time, I did try to understand it. And I think I did. But I actually read this a little bit, well, like a month ago or something like that. I'm only now getting around to making a video on it. So I've got my notes in here, but I'm not so sure how profound my commentary is going to be when I don't know if I really remember exactly all of my revelations. But we open with this, with a great Ishmaelish sentence saying, "What the white whale was to Ahab has been hinted. What at times he was to me, as yet remains unsaid." So we've gotten basically all of the Ahab perspective of that white whale. I don't know if this is specifically the whiteness that's doing this to Ahab, but the white whale for Ahab is, the malignancy and the evil of the world and all of his spiritual exasperations and so on. But what that is to Ishmael is totally different. And we get this cool little opening. He says, "Aside from those more obvious considerations touching Moby-Dick, which could not but occasionally awaken in any man's soul some alarm," those obvious considerations being his size, his strength, that sort of thing, there was another thought, or rather vague, nameless horror concerning him, which at times by its intensity completely overpowered all the rest, and yet so mystical and well-nigh ineffable was it, that I almost despair of putting it in a comprehensible form. It was the whiteness of the whale that above all things appalled me. But how can I hope to explain myself here? And yet, in some dim random way, explain myself I must, else all these chapters might be not. Kind of interesting. Else all these chapters might be not. So here, one way to kind of read that is that this chapter, the whiteness of the whale, is some sort of key to the rest of the book. There we go, whiteness of the whale. That's a very big thing to say. Could this be the most important chapter of all, the whiteness of the whale? Maybe so. The next part of this chapter goes into ways in which whiteness in our world has a perception of goodness and loveliness and the white veil of a wife. Basically, he's sort of giving all of the concessions before he gives his argument, because this chapter is a kind of argument for why whiteness is like horrific, and that's not necessarily a natural feeling for any of us. I don't know if you feel that like whiteness has some sort of specific mystical horror to it besides the ghostliness of it, white ghosts. I certainly had never felt that way. After reading this chapter twice, / kind of 3 times, I've gone back through it a bunch, I do feel like maybe there is something to this, but maybe that's just because he's a great writer and he can convince me of, well, I don't know, his joy is infectious. That's kind of what it is. Maybe I'm not so convinced that whiteness is this kind of spooky, scary thing. But he basically gives all the ways that whiteness can be kind of a positive trait, and then says, "But this elusive quality it is which causes the thought of whiteness, when divorced from more kindly associations, like, marriage and whatever, and coupled with any object terrible in itself, to heighten that terror to the furthest bounds." So whiteness kind of exacerbates terror, makes it scarier. Witness the white bear of the poles and the white shark of the tropics. What but their smooth, flaky whiteness makes them the transcendent horrors they are? Yeah, a great white shark is a scary thing, but the fact that it's got that white mouth, and these polar bears that are white, I don't really have that perception of polar bears. I wouldn't go around looking to cuddle with a polar bear, but like the whiteness of them doesn't seem so much of a strange horror, so much as, to me, it seems like an evolved trait. Maybe that's just the world that I was raised in. When was On the Origin of Species published? I have no idea. I wonder when Darwin published that book, and I wonder if Melville would have read it. I can't believe I don't know that. That's crazy. It's the 1800s sometime, but I don't know. 1860s? Who knows? Embarrassing. Sorry, BookTube. I'm not well versed in all of the. I guess I don't know very much actually about the kind of nonfiction Victorian period. Anyways, going back to the whiteness of the whale, he gives a lot of examples of whiteness and how they're horrific, like or basically how they are sort of revered, and also how cultures perceive whiteness as being some sort of mystical, scary thing, like the white steed of the prairies, and the albatross, I think he even references Coleridge in The Rime of the Ancient Mariner in this chapter. He talks about albino people, which is kind of, honestly, like a little mean-spirited, honestly, for albino people. But I guess that would have had an association in days gone by. What else does he say about it? Subtlety leads to subtlety. Pages 208 through 209, I would say, really, this is the kind of thing that commentary seems to kind of not stick against the wall if you throw commentary at it. It seems to be the kind of thing you just have to soak in. But we eventually do get some things that I have some ideas on. After kind of some long, drawn-out contemplations, reflections on different white things, like the white tops of mountains and things like that, and he kind of acknowledges that what he's talking about is a bit of a stretch, and says, "But thou sayest, methinks this white-led chapter about whiteness is but a white flag hung out from a craven soul. Thou surrenderest to a hypo, Ishmael." Hypo, coming back from the opening paragraph of when my hypos get such an upper hand in me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from stepping out into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off. There's the hypo, I think, in this case is... Here, it seems like hypomania. Like, right now, you're just worked up about something, and you're just going on and on about it. Back then, I think it was kind of more of like the, more of the bipolar, like, manic, depressive episode thing. But then we get the most interesting part of this chapter to me. He describes how a colt, basically when he smells this muskiness of a buffalo, even if that colt had been raised without buffalo ever in its life, but it smells like the skin of the buffalo, it'll kind of dash and it'll freak out, as if it somehow knows in this universe there is this kind of terror that it's never experienced in reality that does exist. And then goes on to draw that comparison. "No, but here thou beholdest even in a dumb brute, in the colt, the instinct of the knowledge of the demonism in the world. Though thousands of miles from Oregon, still when he smells that savage musk, the rending, goring bison herds are as present as to the deserted, wild foal of the prairies, which this instant they may be trampling into dust. Thus, then, the muffled rollings of a milky sea, the bleak rustlings of the festooned frosts of mountains, the desolate shiftings of the windrowed snows of prairies, all these, to Ishmael, are as the shaking of that buffalo robe of the frightened colt." So, in another dimension, in another spiritual dimension, there is some sort of terror, a real terror, like a real buffalo, associated with whiteness, some sort of evil, white, terrific Satan monster or something like that. But in our world, it's not actually here, but the whiteness still calls to it. Maybe there is some sort of spiritual heaven or hell whiteness that would really kind of grip us and destroy us, were we in that kind of supernatural plane. And here, even the shadow of that thing, the quality of the whiteness, is to us that sort of instinctive, it gives us that instinctive fear. Though neither knows where lie the nameless things of which the mystic signs give forth. Where is that evil white thing that gives forth such hints? Yet with me, as with the colt, somewhere those things must exist. Maybe in dreams or something. Though in many of its aspects this visible world seems formed in love, the invisible spheres were formed in fright. So that is so interesting to me, because one of the things I always kind of try to promote about this book is just how fun and friendly and loving the voice of Ishmael is, how fun and friendly and loving the prose is. And yet, it seems like we're getting a lot of belief in evil. We're getting a lot of this kind of fundamental construct of the universe being, invisible fears were formed in fright. That's not very loving. That's, again, like I said earlier, it's like that kind of makes this a wicked book, sort of, in a way. But I find that kind of an interesting idea, that the whiteness evokes in, a sailor seeing a white fog on the sea, some sort of spiritual fear of another nameless horror that doesn't exist in our world, but it's still real, in the same way that a buffalo is still real, even if a colt on a safe prairie has never seen a buffalo. Do you think that's interesting, or do you think that's just kind of codswallop? I don't know. Oh, and also there's this kind of part about a rainbow. I think, at least I drew a rainbow up here, and I always do that whenever there's a rainbow image because Hubert Dreyfus, his name was Hubert Dreyfus, by the way, I looked it up. Hubert Dreyfus is really into the rainbow as being sort of like the thing. I don't think I can find it here. Yeah, but the rainbow sort of being like the, Ishmael's openness to all of the colors of the world, to Ahab's monomania, to the loving friendship of Queequeg, and to all of the other kind of moods that happens is kind of the best way to live is like the rainbow. That's the idea that Hubert Dreyfus had. Kind of an interesting idea. And why it appeals with such power to the soul whiteness. Why is so strange and far more portentous? Why is it at once the most meaning symbol of spiritual things, nay, the veil of the Christian's deity, and yet should be as it is? This is the very important sentence. The intensifying agent in things the most appalling to mankind. So maybe it's not the whiteness in itself, but it's that it intensifies some sort of other horror. That's probably as clear as it gets. And then just this last paragraph is one of the most well-written paragraphs in the whole book. I'll read it and then we'll move on to chapter 43. But hey, if you're not even reading, I cannot believe that anyone would be watching this if they're not reading along, or that anyone would be watching this at all. But if you're not reading along with this book and you're just here because you've read Moby-Dick and you like it and you like hearing some people talk about it, I would definitely recommend reading this last paragraph of The Whiteness of the Whale. Is it that by its indefiniteness it shadows forth the heartless voids and immensities of the universe, and thus stabs us from behind with the thought of annihilation when beholding the white depths of the Milky Way? Whoa. Crazy idea. Really cool sentence, too. Or is it that as an essence, whiteness is not so much a color as the visible absence of color, and at the same time the concrete of all colors? So there's some sort of knowledge of prisms, I guess, at this time. Is it for these reasons that there is such a dumb blankness, full of meaning, in a wide landscape of snows? A colorless all-color of atheism from which we shrink? Well, and when we consider that other theory of the natural philosophers, that all other earthly hues, every stately or lovely emblazoning, the sweet tinges of sunset skies and woods, and the gilded velvets of butterflies, and the butterfly cheeks of young girls, all these are but subtle deceits, not actually inherent in substances, but only laid on from without, so that all deified nature absolutely paints like the harlot, whose allurements cover nothing but the charnel house within. Charnel house being like the, I think that means like the like tomb or graveyard, where the kind of house of the dead, where dead kind of bodies are entombed. And when we proceed further and consider that the mystical cosmetic which produces every one of her hues, the great principle of light, forever remains white or colorless in itself, and if operating without medium upon adder, would touch all objects, even tulips and roses, with its own blank tinge. Pondering all this, the palsied universe lies before us a leper, and like willful travelers in Lapland, who refuse to wear colored and coloring glasses upon their eyes, so the wretched infidel gazes himself blind at the monumental white shroud that wraps all the prospect around him. And of all these things, the albino whale was the symbol. Wonder ye then at the fiery hunt? Great way to turn this really kind of like abstract, partially convincing, partially not super convincing, depending on your own kind of attitude. Great way to turn that back into the plot, with all of these ideas swirling around, all of this meaning, which might not be understood by any of the crew members specifically, but it's felt. Do you wonder then why we're going so crazy over this whale? I love that. Okay, and then moving on to a very short chapter, Hark, which you get a short dialogue, where basically Cabico is talking to, what's the other guy's name? Cholo. Cabico's talking to Cholo, just two new characters, about, hey, did you hear a cough somewhere? I feel like I heard a cough somewhere down on the hold. Nah, you're going crazy, man. You're hearing things. And he's like, mark my words. And apparently, one thing to note about this chapter, Hark, is that Cholo, the person who hears this, tells the rest of the crew that I've heard something, and I think there's someone stowed away. Just to keep that in mind, because that'll be important later. And then chapter 44, we get the chart. And I don't think I'm going to spend too much time on the chart, but basically what we get here is Ahab moving back into his cabin and analyzing charts and methodically, in that kind of, like we said earlier, concentrated, mad way, trying to essentially triangulate Moby-Dick's position and where Moby-Dick will be at a certain point in time. And we sort of get the idea that Moby-Dick is very likely to be off the coast of Japan at a certain time of year. And we're sort of headed towards that. That's sort of the foreshadowings. Okay, off the coast of Japan, that's where we're headed. But Moby-Dick could be kind of making his way along certain routes, so we're going to keep looking out for him. But of course, there's a couple of great descriptions that I want to point out. One of them is this. Ahab is looking over his charts, and we get this paragraph. While thus employed, the heavy pewter lamp suspended in chains over his head continually rocked with the motion of the ship, and forever threw shifting gleams and shadows of lines upon his wrinkled brow, till it almost seemed that while he himself was marking out lines and courses on the wrinkled charts, some invisible pencil was also tracing lines and courses upon the deeply marked chart of his forehead. Wow, what an image. You got this basically chain suspended and a lamp swinging as the ship kind of rocks, calling back sort of to Ahab himself, swinging in his straitjacket. We get that chain moving, and as it's moving, the yellow light that's cast across this kind of, almost, I see this Caravaggio-esque scene, leaving kind of lines on Ahab's forehead from where the shadows fall. As he's tracing charts and lines, it's like something in the world, something in the universe is tracing something on him. So good. I mean, come on, man. Who would think to write that? You know, there's some sort of mesmeric, crazy quality of Melville, some sort of flow state genius thing happening that allows him to write images like that didn't show up in Typee. And I liked Typee a lot, but they show up here. Is it because of his friendship with Hawthorne? Is it because of his plunge into the works of Shakespeare or Milton or Virgil or all of the above? Was he entering a hypomanic phase? Who knows? But I love that image. And then essentially we get just some scientific knowledge, just some actually really interesting stuff, at least to me, about how whales tend to swim in veins. They swim in channels. I wonder now, I should look this up, if we understand that these whales are actually following currents across the oceans and basically going to feeding grounds and nursery grounds and those sorts of places. But whalers, I hate this, of course, but whalers contract those charts and then kill them on the way to their nursery grounds or to their feeding grounds. And even though they're not going to swim, in the same exact line, that vein is about like a mile wide. So if the whaling ship is kind of on that, in the middle of that line, they can kind of look out each way. They can spot whales and be reasonably assured that they'll actually find some whales and kill them. Because if you're like me and you just think, okay, I'm going to go into the open ocean and find a whale and kill it, I mean, I don't even know where you'd begin. So yeah, this whole chapter is essentially just dealing with the logistics of finding one whale and convincing the reader it's actually possible to find a single whale in the entire ocean. So it's a pretty cool one. Anyways, and then I think the end of the chapter is pretty simple. What trances of torments does that man endure? Yeah, we get one great sentence where he says, "Ah, God, what trances of torments does that man endure who is consumed with one unachieved revengeful desire? He sleeps with clenched hands and wakes with his own bloody nails in his palms." I mean, I've never been like that. I hope you've never been like that. But what an image, just sleeping with clenched hands and you wake up and your nails are bloody. That's crazy. The final sentence basically of this is, "God help thee, old man. Thy thoughts have created a creature in thee, and he whose intense thinking thus makes him a Prometheus, a vulture feeds upon that heart forever. That vulture, the very creature he creates." So just more incredible psychology of Ahab. All right, and then we'll move on to chapter 45 soon, the affidavit. So, chapter 45 opens with a great self-aware joke. So far as what there may be of a narrative in this book, and indeed as indirectly touching one or two very interesting and curious particulars in the habits of sperm whales, the foregoing chapter in its earlier part is as important a one as will be found in this volume. So another opening of a chapter that tells us that this chapter is important. Whiteness of the whale is the key to it all. This chapter, also very important. But I love that. So far as what there may be of a narrative in this book, he knows. He knows that he's gone off the rails and that the Queequeg Ishmael buddy cop story is kind of drowned in the ocean, and that, Bulkington's dead, and really we're just going to be talking about whales a lot and then having a crazy demonistic psychology plot. This book is just turning into this like weird masterpiece before our very eyes, and he kind of sees that it's not really much of a narrative. Anyways, as important a one as what we found in this volume, but the leading matter of it requires to be still further and more familiarly enlarged upon, in order to be adequately understood, and moreover to take away any incredulity. I read this word and I know what it means, basically like unbelievability, but I don't know how to say it, which a profound ignorance of the entire subject may induce in some minds, as to the natural verity of the main points of this affair. So essentially what this chapter entails is a bunch of historical examples of crazy things that have happened with whales and whaling that will lend credence to the events in this book. We know this book is a work of fiction. Of course, it's not written that way. Obviously, like, Ishmael is telling the story as if it actually happened. So we're going to get evidence in this book, affidavit, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but essentially there are instances in which a harpoon was stuck into a whale basically, and then 3 years pass. The guy who harpooned the whale then comes back into the whale fishery, and 3 years later finds the same whale and then actually kills it, takes his old harpoon out. I don't need probably to draw our attention to the fact that is horrific. Imagine having like someone sticking something into you that you can't reach or get out. It's like in your back, and it's just festers and grows and then kind of scars you, and it's always in you for years. God, that would just suck. Not to mention that you're a highly complex, smart mammal, which we are. I guess I sort of like that Melville's not doing what I'm doing, which is every single time, not every single time, but a lot of the times that happens, I'm reminding us that this sucks. This whaling thing is terrible, and it's a good thing that it's mostly gone. Melville acknowledges it sometimes, and we're going to get a really good point in which we see how brutal it is, but memorable instances in which a particular whale in the ocean has been at distant times in places particularly cognizable. So basically we get into the celebrity of certain whales. New Zealand Tom, Morquan, King of Japan, Timor Jack, Don Miguel. It's just awesome. And then, of course, the celebrity of our book, Moby-Dick. And just because I've read a little bit about this and know a little bit about the history, there was an actual whale that was terrorized. I don't know actually what waters it was. It was the island of Mocha, around the island of Mocha, and they called that whale Mocha-Dick. Mocha or Mocha, who knows? And so it was really famous. And that's, of course, where the title is half drawn from. So that leads scholars to ask the natural question, where does Moby come from? What do you think? Vote on your phones. No one knows, so your votes are going to go to the void. But I have a theory, and I think it's a theory that's shared by others. I think it's a kind of a portmanteau, if portmanteau is the word I'm looking for, of the word Mocha, and also a reference to his friend, his real-life friend that he talks about in Taipei, Toby. Tobias, who's kind of figures strongly in Taipei as the guy he jumped ship with on a whaling vessel. So, whether it was conscious or not, maybe Melville kind of combined Mocha with Toby for Moby. I'm happy the word Moby is now a word. I'm sure you are too. I think it's one of the reasons why this book is famous is because of the word Moby in the title. Moby-Dick. Also there's another word in the title that kind of makes kids laugh, but I think the title Moby-Dick is a great distinctive title. That also gets at something that I have a little theory about titles. Titling things is kind of difficult. It's kind of hard. If there's a really great work, oftentimes the title or the name, if it's a band name, will eventually kind of absorb those words into just meaning what that kind of work is. So for instance, if I'm talking about Star Wars, you don't think Star Wars. You think about the franchise. It's kind of taken the words and made it into meaning itself, instead of thinking about wars in the stars. You don't really do that anymore. In the same way that, like, when I talk about the Beatles, you don't think about the insects. Just think about the band or that sort of thing. I think there's another way to title things that I really like, which is to give things titles which have maybe flavor of meaning, but really are meaningless by themselves, that you couldn't really use in a sentence, like the word Moby-Dick. Or maybe like the album Kid A by Radiohead is like it means the album now because it's absorbed it. That only really works when the work is really good, I think, because it's almost like that sort of meaningless title is a vessel through which the art has to sort of fill it out. And if it can fill it out, like Moby-Dick or that album Kid A, it works really well. So anyways, we get all these names of different celebrities, Don Miguel and so on. And it seems like Melville invented his own out of Mocha Dick and Toby. So how about that? Yeah, and then basically, there's a really important paragraph here actually concerning the whole book, because famously Moby-Dick is seen as an allegory, as like, or at least the word Moby-Dick is now used as a metaphor for something that you chase, that is like this kind of impossible thing to basically conquer and grasp, that you're obsessed with. And Melville wants us to know that he's not interested in allegory. I do not know where I can find a better place than just here to make mention of one or two other things which to me seem important, as in printed form establishing in all respects the reasonableness of the whole story of the white whale. He's saying this is not fantastical. This could really happen, or this did really happen. I know you're gonna be incredulous that you're gonna think there's no way the events of this book could take place, but they could. More especially the catastrophe. What does that mean? The reasonableness of the whole story of the white whale, more especially the catastrophe. I mean, he's saying right here on page 223 that there's going to be a catastrophe. What does that mean? To what extent that catastrophe will take hold of the characters in this book, we don't know yet. But we know there's going to be a catastrophe. Which, if you're reading this book, I have a feeling you already know that. For this is one of those disheartening instances where truth requires full as much bolstering as error. So ignorant are most landsmen of some of the plainest and most palpable wonders of the world, that without some hints touching the plain facts, historical or otherwise, of the fishery, they might scout at Moby-Dick as a monstrous fable, or still worse and more detestable, a hideous and intolerable allegory. So he's being very clear. This is not a fable, and this is not an allegory. He wants there to be at least the foundation that this could just be a story by itself. Moby-Dick is famous for being a book from which you can draw many interpretations. You can, draw your feminist manifesto from this. You can draw a communist kind of manifesto from this, or at least an anti-capitalist one for sure. Oil being this commodity that is, requires murder. You can draw a lot from it. An anti-Christian sentiment, a pro-Christian sentiment, a globalist thing, whatever you want. But he wants to say, hey, this could just be a fun story about hunting a whale. So I like that because, I don't think anyone really likes that part of academia that turns its nose up at like the most basic level of enjoying a story as a story. I think we all see that kind of academic snob attitude is not fun, and it's not loving, and it's not why most people love reading. And it's not really clear to me that a lot of the people who like study books to get something out of them love the books. I mean, I guess I do want to get something out of a book, but I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to extract ore out of which to, become smarter. I don't know. That's just like reading. Anyways, that could be its own video. Why read books, I guess? Who knows? So anyways, he goes through basically all of these instances in which crazy stuff has happened in the sperm whale fishery. And how many people die, how many people get that rope that they, you throw basically a harpoon at a whale, right? It sticks to the whale, and then you have a fast fish, it's fast to the rope. The rope is in the boat, kind of tied around in coils, attached to the boat. But if it gets wrapped around your leg and then, cuts off, that whale might just sound with that rope. Sound means submerge and go down into the depths. That whale might just sound with you attached to it, and suddenly you're getting dragged below the water pressure bursting your ears, you're drowning, and then, down to the bottomless depths. It's the last time you're ever seen alive. That's crazy. And after kind of giving that sort of description, Ishmael says, "For God's sake, be economical with your lamps and candles. Not a gallon you burn, but at least 1 drop of man's blood was spilled for it." Great reminder that oil is a commodity in this book. They're doing this for money to get oil. They're trying to extract, exactly what I just said about reading, about how I don't like using books as something to extract from. You shouldn't do that with animals either. Of course, if you watch this channel, you know that I love animals and I don't want to hurt them, and I, don't eat animals and anything like that. And here, this is a great kind of anti-capitalist thing, like I just mentioned, reminder of, not a gallon you burn, but at least 1 drop of man's blood was spilled for it. Of course, in our world, that can apply to everything. Everything we buy, everything we touch, everything around us probably had some sort of suffering in it. And, if we can try to minimize that suffering, it's a good thing. I wonder if there were people back in the day who wouldn't buy sperm whale oil out of some sort of like a vegan philosophy, vegan mindset. Obviously, sperm whale oil is not vegan, but it's not a food product, and so a lot of people don't think of vegan things as being non-food products. Like for instance, leather shoes, that sort of thing. So I wonder. Obviously the Quakers weren't. Most of the people on this whale ship are Quakers, which is ironic. There was a guy actually named Benjamin Lay, as a little Quaker interlude. If you're watching this video, look up Benjamin Lay. I think you'd find him very fascinating. He was a little person who was one of the most radical people of his time, who was a Quaker, and before Quakers actually were abolitionists. And he was born, in his society, and was, I think, pretty, not pro-slavery, but just everyone was fine with it, and then actually visited a slave plantation and had his mind changed, and then became an animal rights advocate and wouldn't ride on a horse carriage because he said, have you asked the horse or whatever. And he sort of converted a lot of the Quakers into abolitionists, and just a really fascinating character. I wonder when he lived. I wonder if he would have read this book and found anything in the same way that I find things. Anyways, there are different descriptions of whale attacking ships, and the most significant of them is, of course, in the year 1820, the Essex. So I have a video on my channel describing exactly this real historical event that happened when an 80-foot sperm whale twice, like a battering ram, smashed into a whale ship and sunk it. No one died in the initial kind of ramming, but after months at sea, and after choosing not to go to the island of Tahiti for fear of cannibals, or the Marquesas for fear of cannibals, I think, ended up cannibalizing each other until there were 8 total people left. 5 were found in a boat with human bones in their hands, and 3 of them were found on an island that they were starving to death on. So a huge tragedy that's really horrific, that happened because of a sperm whale ramming into a ship and essentially killing them. Melville read that account by the first or second mate, Owen Chase, and that greatly influenced this book. I highly recommend finding that account and reading it, because it's horrifying and fascinating and really well written. It was probably written by a ghostwriter along with Owen Chase. It'll give you, I think, some of the gravity that Herman Melville alludes to and sometimes even captures in this book. But this book, because it's so all over the place, I think it's good to read the actual account of something like that happening. Anyways, different examples. There's a captain who basically says, I don't believe in such a thing as that a sperm whale would ram a ship. But then his own ship gets rammed and he kind of barely gets out with his neck. And after describing the story of this kind of captain getting the whale karma, Ishmael says, I'm not superstitious. I think you are superstitious, Ishmael. I'm not superstitious, but I consider the Commodore's interview with that whale as providential. Was not Saul of Tarsus converted from unbelief by similar fright? I tell you, the sperm whale will stand no nonsense. Wonderful, just wonderful. So sometimes the jokes in Moby-Dick are uncannily modern, and I think that a lot of new readers to Moby-Dick get to this book and read the parts with like Queequeg and Ishmael, and they're like, wow, this is a book like, written in the 1850s that has like almost like gay jokes that are like fun and loving and kind of appeal to our 21st century sense of humor. Kind of interesting. I think the sentence, "I tell you the sperm whale will stand no nonsense," kind of falls into that category. Anyways, more examples of whales just kind of going crazy on real life ships, and eventually we get this sentence. He eventually goes on to talk about one more example, which is Procopius, the guy who wrote The Secret History. We're not going to go into that example. We're going to go just into the kind of prologue he gives. He says, "I must be content with only one more and a concluding illustration, a remarkable and most significant one, by which you will not fail to see that not only is the most marvelous event in this book corroborated by plain facts of the present day, but these marvels, like all marvels, are mere repetitions of the ages, so that for the millionth time we say Amen with Solomon. Verily, there is nothing new under the sun." A little bit of Ecclesiastes right there. But, of course, what we're drawing our attention to is that not only is the most marvelous event in this book corroborated by plain facts, so another indication that there's going to be a very marvelous event in this book. And this is said by, what was his name? I'm forgetting his name, actually. Not D.H. Lawrence. Anyways, there was a guy who gave a speech on Moby-Dick, and one of the things that he said is that if you structure your book around one encounter with a whale, that one encounter with the whale is probably going to happen at the very end. So we know that there's a most marvelous event that's coming. That's kind of going to be the climax of the book. And that, of course, draws back to what we had on page 223, more especially the catastrophe. So there's a marvelous event that's a catastrophe. So we know that now. I don't know if that's necessarily if Ishmael's intentionally spoiling the book, but he's telling us that something's going to happen that's a catastrophe. So pretty fascinating. And next we'll move on to chapter 46, Surmises. And now we reach chapter 46, Surmises. And this is one of the most fascinating logistical chapters of the book, where you get Melville's good sense of how people operate, of how really to get things done. Because we know that this guy can just go off on the most crazy, lofty idea, joyride that he wants to go on. He can do whatever he wants with the kind of abstract. But he also has a mind for business. And here we get Melville's mind for business by getting Ahab's mind for business. And it's actually something I already mentioned in this episode, so I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, but it's the idea that Ahab knows that to keep the loyalty of the crew during this lofty mission of killing the white whale, getting revenge on all things hateful, we need to get cash. We need to make money, and we need to satisfy our sordidness. So it begins like this. "Though consumed with the hot fire of his purpose, Ahab in all his thoughts and actions ever had in view the ultimate capture of Moby-Dick, and though he seemed ready to sacrifice all mortal interest to that one passion, nevertheless it may have been that he was by nature and long habituation far too wedded to a fiery whaleman's ways, altogether to abandon the collateral prosecution of the voyage," meaning the killing of whales. Or at least if this were otherwise, there were not wanting other motives much more influential with him. It would be refining too much, perhaps, even considering his monomania, to hint that his vindictiveness towards the white whale might have possibly extended itself in some degree to all sperm whales, and that the more monsters he slew by so much, the more he multiplied the chances that each subsequently encountered whale would prove to be the hated one he hunted. So here we get a rare example of Melville putting forward an idea that he thinks is like, nah, this isn't true. Which is crazy, because after the whiteness of the whale, it's kind of like, do you just believe in everything you think, bro? This is kind of out there. So I really do like that he says, okay, Ahab's not trying to kill all these whales because he sort of associates the white whale with all whales. It's not like that. That's nice. It's nice to see that he's not just saying yes to everything. To accomplish his object, Ahab must use tools. And of all tools used in the shadow of the moon, men are the most apt to get out of order. Ooh, what a dark thing to say. Kind of very spooky thing. I mean, it shows that Ahab, at least that's sort of like Ahab's attitude. To Ahab, all these men on the crew, he doesn't care about the families. He doesn't care about their well-being. He doesn't care about anything. They're tools to accomplish his one goal, kill the white whale. And so, he needs to take care of those tools because of all the tools under the shadow of the moon, men are the ones that you can't really rely on. And essentially he goes into the fact that, okay, we gotta do some whaling to keep these boys in check. Another great sentence that actually describes this. Nor was Ahab unmindful of another thing. In times of strong emotion, mankind disdain all base considerations. So, for instance, when Ahab's on the quarterdeck, giving his great big speech, and everyone is swept away by the grandiloquence, we disdain money, we disdain glory, we disdain anything, but we're here for goodness, for truth, for whatever our big high-minded things are. But such times are evanescent. The permanent constitutional condition of the manufactured man, thought Ahab, is sordidness. Wow. So, I mean, a bit of brutal reality, at least from this perspective. Obviously, there are people who live by ideals that are kind of lofty, and the way they live by them is not evanescent. They live by them every day, every moment of every day. And they actually adhere to them in tandem with all of the down-to-earth, nitty-gritty things you actually have to do to maintain that. They're mutual. They're mutually compatible, I mean. The high and mighty lofty stuff and all the base considerations. But to Ahab, basically, Ahab actually agrees. He says, yes, they're not only mutual, it's necessary to have the base considerations. So I guess in this sense, he just thinks that he has to kind of keep feeding the crew with all the slaughter of whaling to keep them kind of happy so that they can continue, with all of their enjoyment or all of their, I guess, eagerness to kill the white whale. I think a pigeon just landed on my balcony. That's kind of cool. It's the first, piece of nature I've seen in a month, which is why I surround myself with tapestries of trees. Gosh, this is so good. Had they been strictly held to their one final and romantic object, the killing of the white whale, that final and romantic object too many would have turned from in disgust. I will not strip these men, thought Ahab, of all hopes of cash. Aye, cash. They may scorn cash now, but let some months go by, and no prospective promise of it to them, and then this same quiescent cash, all at once mutinying in them, this same cash would soon cashier Ahab. Oh, God, that's good. I don't even know. Is cashier a verb? I don't know. Is this some sort of Shakespearean use of language? Probably. I don't know. Maybe not. I've never heard it that way. It just feels so good the way he says it. And I guess the last part was that... and the last part acknowledges that Ahab has technically gone against the will of the shareholders, the stockholders, and Peleg and Bildad. And the crew are effectively mutinying against... the goal that they have, and so he needs kind of protection. That protection could only consist in his own predominating brain and heart and hand, backed by a heedful, closely calculating attention to every minute atmospheric influence, which it was possible for his crew to be subjected to. This is just such a satisfying, logical chapter that comes in the midst of so much kind of craziness. It's kind of I won't say it's a breath of fresh air, because I like all the other stuff too. It's just a good contrast. For all these reasons, then, and all others perhaps too analytic to be verbally developed here, Ahab plainly saw that he must still, in a good degree, continue true to the natural, nominal purpose of the Pequod's voyage, observe all customary usages, and not only that, but force himself to evince all his well-known passion and interest in the general pursuit of his profession. In reality, he doesn't give, a rat's tail for whaling anymore. He doesn't really care about it. But he cares about his quest for the white whale and knows that whaling is going to be an essential part of that, so he still maintains appearances. And that's kind of Ahab's game, is maintaining the appearance of being a normal person while being actually a psycho. Be all this as it may, his voice was now often heard hailing the three mastheads and admonishing them to keep a bright lookout and not omit reporting even a porpoise. This vigilance was not long without reward. And now we get to chapter 47, The Mapmaker, one of my personal favorites in the book. And you know what we're going to get now, boys and girls? Action. Finally, some action. We haven't really had action since, I guess, Queequeg saved that guy on while he was on the boat from New Bedford to Nantucket. Unless you count, Peleg kicking Ishmael in the bum while he on Merry Christmas. But this chapter is the mapmaker. Not quite the action chapter yet, but the calm before the storm. Gosh, we just get this wonderful description, which I won't read in full because I think my jaw is starting to get tired of reading. But of Ishmael and Queequeg kind of making a mat, and Ishmael having an experience which is actually brought up a couple of times throughout this book, in the mat maker and in the squeeze of the hand, of while performing a repetitive action, entering this hypnotic state of reflection and pondering and coming to this sort of equanimity with the universe and with his role in it, and also kind of reflecting on the nature of things that are related to the nature of the task he's doing. So for instance, in this, he sees the different actions of Queequeg's slicing kind of the pieces of the warp, the long yarns, as kind of being like pieces of chance. And there's sort of like all of these things at play. There's chance, free will, necessity, all interweaving and working together. There's really no way to describe this chapter very well unless you read it. So do read this if you're following along, because it's so beautifully done. And we actually get my favorite use of the kind of line of asterisks in a book, where after this paragraph, which I'll read the very last sentence of, you get this kind of calm, and it's sort of like on an album where you have a lot of dense, rich, beautiful music. You get to a song that's not afraid to just stop for a second. There's this beautiful moment in the most recent album by a band called Black Country New Road, which is a great band, whose lead singer left and main songwriter left, and the 6 remaining members of the band, who are all like, people my age who are classically trained musicians. Three of them stepped forward to write songs. All of them are women, and the penultimate song on the album is the actual title of the album, is Forever How Long. And this band is very famous for having a lot of, like I said, dense, richly layered music with changing time signatures, really big climaxes. And this whole song is this kind of like free-form, almost like poetry journal entry set to a bunch of people playing like slackened clarinets, or maybe they're playing recorders, I think. And there's this moment where there's this like hesitating silence line, and then all the music just stops for like 5 seconds. And if you're listening to the album, actually listening to it, not on a run and listening, and not even on a walk and listening, just laying down and listening, that feels like it gives so much depth to the rest of the music. All of the preceding music, which is a weird feeling. Not just what's going to happen for the next end of the song and on the album, the final song, but it feels like the whole album has some confidence in it that is really meaningful. And I get the same feeling. I know this is a very small thing, just from these little asterisks right here, stopping this kind of continual narrative. The end of this is that Ishmael's saying, the straight warp of necessity, not to be swerved from its ultimate course. It's every alternating vibration, indeed, only tending to that. Free will, still free to ply her shuttle between given threads, and chance, though restrained in its play within the right lines of necessity, and sideways in its motions, modified by free will, though thus prescribed but two by both. Chance by turns rules either, and has the last featuring blow at events. Thus we were weaving and weaving away when we started, and it continues. And then, there she blows. There she blows. Where away? On the lee beam, about 2 miles off, a school of them. Action. So we kind of get this hypnotic, mesmerizing passage, a breath, and then go into the action again, which I really love. That's just great novelistic instinct from Melville, I think. Also, I didn't even go into it, but that's fascinating, the interplay, the interweaving of free will, necessity, and chance. And then, of course, chance rules either. Chance really is the greatest factor in it all. And basically, they mark the time. Everyone starts getting to their positions to get ready to lower for these sperm whales. And then the very end, we get this paragraph. But at this critical instant, a sudden exclamation was heard that took every eye from the whale. With a start, all glared at dark Ahab, who was surrounded by 5 dusky phantoms that seemed fresh formed out of air. Ba ba ba! Dusky phantoms, new characters, new people, and of course, there's been enough foreshadowing for this that we've known. Chapter 48, the first lowering. The phantoms, for so they then seemed, were flitting on the other side of the deck, and with a noiseless celerity were casting loose the tackles and bands of the boat which swung there. And basically here we just get this description of these 5 stowaways led by the mysterious Fadala, who are from somewhere in the east. It kind of has a bit of that like oriental mystical thing in there. So I guess that feels a little dated, but it's still too filled with all of this like strange Melvillian prose for it to feel cliched. But it's basically Fadala and these 4 assistants who are Captain Ahab's own boat, his own ship. Ahab's not really supposed to be going out onto, the actual whaling, lowering expeditions to kill the whales. He's supposed to be the captain who's just kind of the playmaker, the general. Later on, we're actually going to, I think we get it right here, maybe in this own chapter. Of like what is really not ethicality, but like should a whaling captain really lower for a vessel for whales, because the whole voyage depends on his well-being, and if he dies, which is very possible when he's actually lowering for whales, the whole voyage is kaput. So it might be best that he doesn't actually charge forth. It's like the general of an army being on the front lines. Like, it's probably just kind of a stupid idea. But anyways, the whole crew is pretty dumbfounded by the appearance of 5 strangers. Like, I don't know how long they are into this journey, like a month or 2. But basically, they're not so dumbfounded because Cholo has already given a little bit of a warning. So we already know that they're going to come in. And then we get, oh my gosh, one of my favorite pieces of dialogue from this whole book. The way that each mate talks to his crew while they're rowing out for the whales is so peculiar. Starbuck focuses on having this very communal, very traditional, formal, militaristic command. He just loves kind of telling, come on, men, hut, ho, whatever. But Stubb, his is so weird, and this strange contrast of violent, what's the word? Basically, he's giving them these commands that are so visceral and harsh, at the same time kind of giving them lullabies and cooing to them, and just kind of going back and forth between it. He says, pull, pull, my fine heart's life, pull, my children, pull, my little ones, drawlingly and soothingly sighed Stubb to his crew, some of whom still showed signs of uneasiness. Why don't you break your backbones, my boys? What is it you stare at? Those chaps in yonder boat? Tut! There are only 5 more hands come to help us, never mind from where. The more the merrier. Pull, then, do pull, never mind the brimstone. Devils are good fellows enough. So, there you are. Now that's the stroke for 1,000 pounds. That's the stroke to sweep the stakes. Hurrah for the gold cup of sperm oil, my heroes. 3 cheers, men. All hearts alive. Easy, easy. Don't be in a hurry. Why don't you snap your oars, you rascals? Bite something, you dogs. So then. Softly. That's it. Long and strong. Give way there, give way. The devil fetch you ragamuffin rapscallions. You're all asleep. Stop snoring, you sleepers, and pull. Pull, will you? Pull, can't you? Pull, won't you? Why in the name of gudgeons and ginger cakes don't you pull? Pull and break something. Pull and start your eyes out. Here, whipping the sharp knife from his girdle. Every mother's sons of you draw his knife and pull with the blade between his teeth. That's it. Now you do something. That looks like it, my steel bits. Start her, my silver spoon. Start her, marling spikes. What is that? That is so funny and great. He says Stubbs' exordium to his crew is given here at large because he had a rather peculiar way of talking to them in general. Obviously, and in fact, Melville puts it best. He says, he would say the most terrific things to his crew in a tone so strangely compounded of fun and fury. That's just it. And the fury seemed so calculated merely as a spice to the fun that no oarsman could hear such queer invocations without pulling for his dear life, and yet pulling for the mere joke of the thing. What It's just so brilliant to incorporate Stubbs' character and his personality with that piece of dialogue and the way that his own peculiarities actually function as his duties of being a good second mate. That's really amazing. In most books, in most pieces of fiction, the character is this made-up person, and the qualities that are ascribed to them just seem like they're thought of on a whim by the author, and they don't really have much bearing on actually what they do in real life and what they do in the story. They're just kind of plastered on for fun. But here we see Stubbs' personality. How can a person with like the jollity of indifference be a good mate? Well, here we see how he's a good mate. He can kind of use that as his power. Flask, on the other hand, is just a frenzied nightmare. He's just like a stamping tantrum child. He even actually stamps on his boat. And then we get a callback, by the way, when they're looking at Ahab. Ishmael says, "For me, I silently recalled the mysterious shadows I had seen creeping on board the Queequeg during the dim Nantucket dawn, as well as the enigmatical hintings of the unaccountable Elijah." So in that chapter where it opens with the dialogue of saying, "Queequeg, let's go. Don't you see something up there?" And Elijah says, "Oh, what's on the board? What's on ship?" So it was basically Fedallah and his four guys. Flask ends up standing on top of Daggoo, which is a pretty funny scene. I really like that one. And eventually they enter this mist. A squall comes. A squall is this kind of storm that quickly, rises on the ocean. And they end up going after a whale. And essentially, Queequeg stands up in the boat. You got to just read this chapter to get the descriptions and the journalistic immediacy and all the stuff I talk about. Queequeg throws the harpoon. It doesn't sink into the whale. The whale capsizes the boat. They barely come in. They're lost in the mist. They don't know where they are. They start freezing. A day passes. Queequeg is holding up the lamp. There's a description. He says, "There then he sat, the sign and symbol of a man without faith, hopelessly holding up hope in the midst of despair." When all of a sudden, out of the mist, when all hope is lost, after failing to basically make it back to the boat, back to the main ship, the Pequod comes out of the mist, and they all jump out on board before it's crushed underneath the keel of the ship, and they're pulled on board, gasping for breath, barely made it. I mean, they thought they were lost for sea. It says, actually, the last sentence, "Ere the squall came close to, the other boats had cut loose from their fish and returned to the ship in good time." So they didn't actually capture any whales because they realized there was a storm coming. "The ship had given us up, but was still cruising, if happily it might light upon some token of our perishing, an oar or a lance pole." So they were given up for dead. And then we get the opening of chapter 49, which, if you've watched I think one of my first videos on this channel was about Moby-Dick, since it's my favorite book. And I read passages, and I read this passage. This is famous, and it's amazing. "There are certain queer times and occasions in this strange mixed affair we call life, when a man takes this whole universe for a vast practical joke, though the wit thereof he but dimly discerns, and more than suspects that the joke is at nobody's expense but his own. Excuse me. However, nothing dispirits, and nothing seems the worthwhile disputing. He bolts down all events, all creeds and beliefs and persuasions, all hard things visible and invisible, never mind how knobby, as an ostrich of potent digestion gobbles down bullets and gunflints. And as for small difficulties and worryings, prospects of sudden disaster, peril of life and limb, all these, and death itself, seem only to him sly, good-natured hits and jolly punches in the side bestowed by the unseen and unaccountable old joker." Great description of, I guess, God. "That odd sort of wayward mood I am speaking of comes over man only in some time of extreme tribulation. It comes in the very midst of his earnestness, so that what just before might have seemed to him a thing most momentous now seems but a part of the general joke. There is nothing like the perils of whaling to breed this free and easy sort of genial desperado philosophy, and with it I now regarded this whole voyage of the Pequod and the great white whale its object." I remember reading this passage and thinking, oh, someone gets it. someone gets this feeling. I've never heard it put into words. The same feeling I think a lot of us get when we read Shakespeare, because Shakespeare often puts into words things that we have felt and have never heard expressed, much less expressed in the way that Shakespeare expresses them, which is to say, perfectly and with a thunderbolt into your very heart. But I never heard this feeling where you get that kind of stub-like jollity of indifference in the midst of extreme tribulation. It happens all the time to me. You know, if you know you have like time to prepare for an exam and you're really stressed about it, you don't get this feeling. But when you're thrown into just the bog of life and just so much is going wrong, maybe you've hurt yourself in some way, and you have a commitment, and you have just whatever personal torments, some deep, fun, joking strength can surge from within, where you just feel like, oh, you know what? I'm just like as Bo Burnham would put it, a piece on the board of Satan and God's backgammon game. You know, I don't have control over what's happening to me. I'm just going to allow myself to be blown, and I'm going to have a good attitude about it. And it's almost like the attitude itself is this gift. You didn't even choose it. You just feel that way. I have felt this many times in my life. I haven't felt it all that recently. Oh, actually, I did feel it recently. Actually, my first day of working my new job, since I'm teaching English in Japan, I wasn't supposed to teach. And normally it had taken me before this, like an hour and a half to prepare every lesson, because I'm new. And of course, it shouldn't take that long once you actually know what you're doing. But, you know, I just finished training and everything. And whenever I did a demo lesson, like I said, it takes me an hour and a half. And then I got to the school, and I learned that the person I was supposed to be just kind of doing a support shift and helping out at the school. One of the people who was going to actually teach that day had like 7 classes, and they couldn't show up. I think they were sick or something. So without any preparation, I had to teach 7 classes, where normally I would spend an hour and a half on each class preparing with the materials and sorting things out and knowing what to say. And at that moment, I felt this kind of jollity of indifference. I said, well, screw it. I'm screwed. I'm not going to do the best job in the world. I'm just going to do my best and jump into it, and just frenziedly ran around and tried to teach the best I could. And it ended up being a great day. It ended up being a great day because I didn't let it destroy my peace of mind, and I didn't let it destroy kind of like my happiness, if that makes sense. And I think that's why the classes actually ended up going kind of well, which is funny, you know. And I love that. I mean, I have read this so long ago, long before I experienced that particular event, and yet because you read these things in books, maybe over and over again like I do, when they actually happen to you, you even understand them better, and I felt like I could give in to that feeling even more. So I love that opening paragraph of the hyena. And Ishmael goes on to ask Queequeg and other mates, you know, he's heard that Starbuck is basically the pinnacle of, of like safety, and he basically, this is actually a great exchange. When he asks Mr. Flask, which I'll read to you, excuse me, he says, "Mr. Flask," said I, turning to little King Post, who was standing close by, "you are experienced in these things, and I am not. Will you tell me whether it is an unalterable law in the fishery, Mr. Flask, for an oarsman to break his own back, pulling himself back foremost into death's jaws?" "Can't you twist that smaller?" said Flask. "Yes, that's the law. I should like to see a boat's crew backing water up to a whale face foremost. Ha ha! The whale would give him the squint for squint, mind that." Basically, he's making fun of the way Ishmael's talking, which is kind of great, because we're just spending all this time with Ishmael. So I liked Flask saying, "Can't you twist that smaller?" Like, do you have to put it that way? Breaking his own back, pulling himself back foremost into death's jaws. Describing the fact that basically if you're on a boat and you're an oarsman, the boat, if you're rowing, is going that way. You can't see where actually you're headed. So you gotta have a lot of trust basically in the person who's the kind of the captain of your boat, the first mate. And then we get this just really funny, well-structured passage with a punchline, which I won't read the whole thing, but he's basically like, considering all of these capsizings, considering that Starbucks is supposed to be the smartest guy here, he's famous for his great heedfulness, considering all this, and finally considering what a devil's chase I was implicated, touching the white whale, taking all these all together, says I thought I might as well go below and make a rough draft of my will. So, hey, you know what? I'm probably going to die doing this. "Queequeg," said I, "come along. You shall be my lawyer, executor, and legatee." And then, this is a great sentence. It may seem strange that of all men, sailors should be tinkering at their last wills and testaments, but there are no people in the world more fond of that diversion. This is my 4th time in my nautical life that I've done the same thing. And essentially, he just kind of, he has this great description of the fact that now that I've survived this, the rest of my life is a gift. I should have died. So I'm like Lazarus, and every new day is a gift of a day, which, as we all know, is the secret to life. You have to think that every day is a gift of a day. That's, from that perspective, it's obvious. Because if every day is the opposite, if every day has to prove itself to you why it was worth living, and every bad thing that happens is just confirmation that life is miserable, then you're just going to be miserable, because you're only going to see the miserable things. And every time something bad happens to you, you're just going to feel like, oh, this darn life, I have to keep going. But if every day is a gift and you get to experience anything at all, even if you have, I know, like me, if you deal with like chronic pain, like, if every day is a gift and there's all these other things that are happening besides that pain, that are really, really great, and that deserve that sort of happy-go-lucky attitude. Obviously, you can't sustain that moment to moment, but it's a great thing to be reminded of, and Moby-Dick reminds me of that, and so maybe that's one of the reasons why it's my favorite book. And then, of course, it ends with this great sentence, as Melville always tends to do. Now then, thought I, unconsciously rolling up the sleeves of my frock, here goes for a cool, collected dive at death and destruction, and devil fetch the hindmost. Awesome. And finally, chapter 50, the end of our reading for today, is Ahab's boat and crew, Fedallah, in which we kind of get a description of the kind of demon crew, and also what I mentioned earlier, whether Ahab should be lowering or not, kind of the logistics of that. We get an exchange from Stubb and Flask about whether Ahab is actually dismasted below the knee or whether he has a joint. And essentially Stubb says Flask thinks that he's only been like dismasted basically below the my socks have lots of holes in them, basically just below the knee. And Stubb says, I don't know that, my little man. I never yet saw him kneel. So maybe actually Ahab's been kind of dismasted all the way, like from here down or something like that. Who knows? And of course, the thing that I brought up earlier, among whale-wise people, it has often been argued whether, considering the paramount importance of his life to the success of the voyage, it's right for a whaling captain to jeopardize that life in the active perils of the chase. So, should Ahab be going down? Of course, Ahab is gonna be going for it. He's just that kind of personality. And then we get these descriptions of Fedallah. One cannot sustain an indifferent air concerning Fedallah. He was such a creature as civilized domestic people in the temperate zone only see in their dreams, and that but dimly, but the like of whom now and then glide among the unchanging Asiatic communities, especially the Oriental Isles to the east of the continent. And this is the final bit that I'll read for us today, and then we're actually done. Crazy. Those insulated, immemorial, unalterable countries, which even in these modern days still preserve much of the ghostly aboriginalness of Earth's primal generation, when the memory of the first man was a distinct recollection, and all men his descendants, unknowing whence he came, eyed each other as real phantoms, and asked of the sun and moon why they were created, and to what end. And when though, according to Genesis, the angels indeed consorted with the daughters of men, the devils also, add the uncanonical rabbins, indulged in mundane amours. So Fedallah comes from this kind of early man feeling where the mystical is real. Angels and devils consort with humans, and that adds the mystical element to our story, because for Fedallah, who we'll see is a kind of prophet-like figure, there's more than just atoms. There's more than just the kind of like the physical view of the world, the physicalist belief that all things are just kind of scientifically observable and all that. I don't know what your own opinions are on whether there is a supernatural or not. I tend to fall down this idea that I don't think there's a supernatural, but I think that there's much to the natural that is actually baked into the universe that a lot of people think is supernatural. Like good and evil. I think good and evil are real things that are part of this universe, that are not supernatural, that are not ordained by a supernatural thing, but don't seem to be measurable in the same way that velocity is measurable, that sort of thing. But I love that that's introduced into this book through Fadala. And that kind of ends this set of chapters, which is a pretty good way to end with the first lowering, with the chase, and with Ishmael's near-death experience. It's wow. I mean, this book, we're taking off. I mean, we are underway. I think I've been doing this read-along for months and months and months now, even though I've been reading lots of things between this. I actually don't read this book that often because I know I don't have time to make videos very often because it takes me a couple hours. And I only have 2 days off and that sort of thing, and lots of other things in life to look forward to and do as well. So I hope you're enjoying if you're still watching along, and thank you for reading. And next time, I think we'll have another interesting set of chapters. I've looked ahead a little bit. Yes, we'll have the town host story, which is one of my favorites. So yeah, thank you, everybody, and I will see you next time. Stay safe, and yeah, happy Moby-Dick season. Bye-bye.